is 5 minutes for the instructors or other students to ask you questions. So, you know, if we don't think you've maybe brought a point up, we might poke at you and see if we can get you to talk about that point. So again, pretty short, concise type of thing. Again, like Dan said, we were hoping that this wasn't something that consumed you for a week and a half over, and especially over Easter, that something simple and concise, just showing us that you've got, you kind of were paying attention to the course, brought some of that knowledge forward that you can then carry forward into your jobs in the future. So that's really all we're looking for. Are there any questions?
In case anyone missed it, I'm recording now, so you are on this call. It means you give permission to be recorded. Again, recordings will not be shared publicly or anything. They will be uploaded again for knowledge, for the course sake, and possibly to help with grading in case we, you know, missed something. And thanks, Dana. It sounds like you're going to give the 1 minute warning. Just because some people may have different screen things, you might have to jump in vocally and do that, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just do it vocally. I'll just say 1 minute. I hope not to knock you off a stride, but go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, just a quick question. In terms of the submission for the presentation, the last email said you just wanted a clip of our first slide. Is that still the case? It's kind of hard to upload that much presentation via the bandwidth I'm dealing with.
Yeah, it just makes it much easier to have something submitted in Canvas, and then we can grade that. So it makes it way easier just with the Canvas stuff. So that's the purpose of that. But yeah, good question, Evan.
Are there any other questions? So again, when we call you to start your presentation, I'm not going to start the timer until you're ready. So if there's technical issues or anything else, you know, we'll let you know that we can see your presentation, that we can hear you, and the ag timer will start. So with that, Speedy Gonzalez from Newfoundland, Lori driving the whole way across the province just to get her presentation ready and to go. So Lori, take over the screen.
Okay, I'll jump on. Let's see what we got. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. So I'm doing a case study of the Central Forest Complex, which was a couple large fires we had back in the 2022 season. I chose a Prometheus overview of the fire, modeling of comparing the forecast weather versus the actual weather at the time, and doing a few fuel patches and stuff. So this is just an overview of one of the fire areas. It's the main highway that links the southern part of the province to the central, where the Trans-Canada goes through. This highway was impacted and closed for a week. And I'll just jump right in here. So this is just an overview so you can see where the fires were and the fire size. This main one in Paradise Lake was just over 17,000 hectares. So I'm going to do a review of two of these, and this is the Trans-Canada you could see, and the other highway going south. The fire started on July the 24th from lightning starts. The cold front went through, and we dealt with fire for pretty much the rest of the fire season. So with Prometheus, my inputs, the weather, I had two weather stations from the area. They were quite far away. One was like 20 something kilometers to the south. The other one was 30 or more kilometers to the north. So I used the data that I had from both of those weather stations. We did get a quick deploy on site, but it wasn't in time for the analysis that I did here. So I used the actuals from those stations I just talked about, and I did the interpolation factor there in Prometheus with that. And I also had some forecast weather from Spot, the RDPS model, I think it was, that I had for 3 days during this time frame. So I looked back at what happened with actual weather versus the forecast. As well, we had one day there that it was forecasted to be 40 gusting to 60 kilometer-hour winds it didn't really show that in the forecast that I had in the model, like some of the days hit 40. So I did a wind patch to jump that up to 50 kilometers an hour to see what happened on that one day if the winds were higher. So what I had for fuels was, thankfully Sam shared the national fuel grid with me because we didn't have fuel grid here. So that was from CFS at 100-meter resolution, as well as the digital elevation model. When I looked at the fuels, there was a lot of the bogs are all as typed as grass, which is what I would have done as well, but it was matted grass. So I changed that to standing grass at 80% cured for mid-August. And that was a landscape patch. And then I also did a fuel patch for the area of Paradise Lake, taking some of the M2 that was 75% conifer, 25% deciduous, and I changed that to a C2 based on field observation. It seemed to be more in a C2 type. The ignitions, you'll see I did projections for one day of the fire start over on the Beta Spare Highway, just to see in that one day of growth what actually happened on the ground compared to what a Prometheus model would do for like a 4 or 5 hour time range, just to compare. And then my other exercise was on the Paradise Lake, comparing those weather forecasts that I mentioned earlier. So for the ignition, the first day, of course, that was a point ignition. And my other days, that was taken from perimeters that I had on August the 5th, and then I projected them for 3 days in. So this is a picture closer up of the Beta Spare Highway fires. So you can see the fuels, some of the ones I was dealing with. So on the left here, that was, I think, in the fuel grid typed as the grass on site. I actually typed it back when the fire happened more as a C1 because there was a lot of caribou lichen on it, but I compared that in a run and it didn't really seem to make a big difference. So I just kept that as the grass fuel type in the Prometheus modeling. And on the right-hand side, you can see there was patchy C2 within, especially like where it jumped the river and came up across the highway. And then the fuels on Paradise Lake, it was mostly C2 to the head, the north of the fire. As you can see, this is looking south onto the fire from a cutover in the area. And all the bogs were dry at the time and they were burning pretty well. So they were grass, but on the right-hand side, you can see the burn was kind of patchy. There was later on into the fire, like beyond the projections that I were doing, there was a bit of precip. So then some of the bogs were holding the fires a little bit better in places than others. But a lot of our fuels here are kind of like patchy, discontinuous, not large, vast runs of C2 forest type. So this was July 24th, picture of the Prometheus model, and I did the point ignitions. I didn't actually have the complete spot of where they were, but based on the fire perimeters, I kind of guesstimated where the spots would have started. So you can see here that I had a couple of weather stations and the point ignitions, and I did put in the highway here as a barrier to fire spread. It didn't jump the highway in that fire there to the north, but the southern part, it did jump the highway and a bit of that river. So I didn't put that guard there to prevent the fire from jumping in that area. So then if you just take those perimeters and put them into Google, the growth, that one day run compared to the actual fire perimeters are there in the green. And I was just looking at the difference. So obviously that day of the cold front, I think the winds were in the actual weather compared to what they actually grew. I guess they were kind of, shifting around. So I didn't get the true same wind direction and growth. Here we'll jump over to Paradise Lake using a projection with the forecasted weather model from the RDPS from spot weather for 3 days. And I started it with a perimeter from the night of August 5th, early morning August 6th, and then grew it the full day of 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I I did have a fuel patch. You can see here the outline in black and where the M2 75% conifer was changed to C2, which allowed the fire to grow a little bit further distance. And the day of the 7th was our big run day, and then the wind shifted, and you can see the fire then moved to the southeast direction after that. And then this is comparing the observed weather with a weather patch put on it. So the observed, that weather patch did allow it to grow more to the north in that C2 fuel. The winds were stronger for a longer period of time at 50K. So of course that made it grow further that day. And versus just the observed weather without a patch of what happened. And of course, you can see the big difference in that wind and how the fire didn't grow as far. And here, the actual fire perimeters in the green, and the orange is the Prometheus model with the observed weather as it was, versus the red is the forecasted weather, and then the patch put on that forecasted weather. So you can see how the differences is in fire growth over those days. So the big difference was the forecast of August 7th and 8th, when we were supposed to have a lot higher winds. We didn't actually get them, and we actually had more cloud cover, and the relative humidity was higher as well. So we didn't get the same fire growth as expected. So if I jump over here, I just showed the days of August. Oh, of August 7th, and you can see how the ISIs and FWIs are a lot higher in those days with the forecasted weather versus what actually happened those days. And here I just grabbed a sounding from the closest available location, which was around, I guess, 4 hours drive, or even 5, so 400 kilometers, I guess, to the west. And we did have some inversion going on there in the morning, but by midday, or sorry, around noon, 1300, it did break. And then we had a bit of an unstable atmosphere, and you can see the wind on the side. It was quite windy that day. And that's it for the project that I did. If you have any questions. Probably flew through at Newfoundland talking speed.
Any questions? Mr. Staley?
Yeah, good day, Lori. Just
Hi.
wondering, how deep was it burning in that peat or the bogs there? Did it self-extinguish?
No, it did burn pretty good. We had some like deep hole pockets throughout the burn. Of course, it was deeper in the C2 and stuff of the burn than the peat, but it, I mean, comparison to Alberta, we weren't that dry, but dry for here.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Geez, you guys are letting her off easy.
I'll thank Brett while I'm on here, because I did have to reach out to him for some technical issues. It seemed like my model, it would run to 3 days, but I had to knock down the projection perimeters to 1 every 12 hours, I think it was. And because I couldn't get it to export the perimeters either, if it was like way more, my computer just used to crash. Hi, Dan.
I was waiting for Dana to cue me. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I just had a curious, you said it was, I think, a 3-day projection. Did you use the burning conditions at all, or did you run it burning all night?
No, I did. I used I think the RH, I had it at less than 70. And ISI, I had it at 6, greater than 6. And FWI greater than 12, I think. And I based those numbers on the Wang paper that we reviewed. And the 70,
do you remember how many, do you remember how many hours that sort of ended up being of burning per day that were over those thresholds?
Yeah, it actually restricted it that it didn't really start burning until around like noon to even like 1300 to around say 7 p.m. So it really held it back quite a bit. Our RHs too are kind of a lot higher usually. Like the lowest I think on those days were in the 30s, which is pretty dry for here.
You've also got a question from Marty there in the chat.
Hi, Marty. Oh, sorry. I guess I'll look at the chat.
Did you try to infer wind speed from the length to breath ratio?
No, I'll admit that I didn't really look into that much.
Are there any other questions? Going once, going twice. So,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Lori. Thank you, Lori. You can breathe now. I know you've
Yeah.
been rushing all day, so sit back and relax and watch as the other students go at it.
Thanks. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Okay. The next up are Anne-Claude and Jay-Z. Is there going to be dual spokesmen for this group or just?
Yeah, we'll both take a turn for presenting. It's good to see everyone. You guys can see the screen, the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Anne-Claude.
Oh, you're on mute.
Great. All right. Hi. Take two. All right. So Jay and I are gonna talk to you today about a fire that occurred near Fort Smith last summer. It started in Wood Buffalo National Park on June 1st, and kind of was burning till October 10th and grew to about 500,000 hectares. We are going to focus today on the spread event day from August 13th, which is like the kind of dark orange. I don't know if you're seeing my mouse here, but that long finger run here that threatened the community of Fort Smith and Fort Fitz. I was F-band that day, and then Jay got to be F-band sort of after me on the next shift. So I can switch slide. So I just wanted to give, like, this is a super busy operational map, but it was just something I could find just to give you some context. You can see where Fort Smith is and where the fire was sitting the day before on August 12th. And so that was about 40 kilometers from Fort Smith. And you can see all the sort of the fuel in between, unburned fuel. There was like the salt plain feature, but there was also a little bit of everything, a lot of C2, a lot of like those really dry bogs that were typed as grass, 70% curing, some M2 and some like old burns that we were typing as S2. Also, just for context, like so we were sort of like right at the frontier of like Alberta and Northwest Territory border at that time. So we were not working in unified command, but we were kind of working closely, and Alberta had taken that East Division over there. And my and IMT, we were focusing on the West Division. So that's kind of what my Prometheus runs, and like what we're going to talk about today was sort of focus on that West side, for which I was responsible for. And yeah, so that's zooming in, kind of like the run we're most concerned about here. So it's about 38-kilometer run from 11 a.m. till 22 p.m. And it landed really close to Fort Smith, and it was actually running sort of like due west right into Fort Smith until like 6 o'clock, and then the wind shifted a little bit and kind of pushed it to the south of Fort Smith, thankfully. So if you can go back. I just wanted to see, like, there's some times of when like we kind of the fire was reported, like where it was, and which allowed me to like calculate some rate of spread. So it was going from 45 meters per minute to like 88 meters per minute in some section. And I had done my projection, like we knew it was going to be a really like active day. We were expecting a 20-kilometer run, but not a 38-kilometer run. So this was the sort of the fire behavior that we like. At some point, everything was all the helicopters were grounded and everybody was off the line, so we actually didn't know where the fire was and what it was doing. But these are some of the last pictures we were able to take around 2 p.m. Of the fire behavior, and then you can see at the base in Fort Smith what it looked like at 3 p.m. So it's quite airy. And I was keeping a close eye on the weather station, and weirdly, the weather station, like all the different weather stations that were close by, were reporting winds that were like 20 gusting to 40, but not like really high sustained winds. But you know, in the morning in the helicopter when I was there with the ops chief, and we had clocked it at 40 kilometers per hour at 11 a.m. at tree height in the helicopter right at the front of the fire. So everything was sort of indicating from the rate of spread. If you just flip to the next slide, Jay. Yeah, so basically at 3 in the afternoon, we had like an eye on where the fire front was, and it was at where I had predicted it to be there by the end of the day. So this is when you go, and then like I figured the rate, like the way the fire was spreading, the speed was as if the winds were 40 kilometers per hour instead of what my weather station was reporting to be 20. So I'm like, oh my God, quick recalculation. I knew we had forecasted crossover condition, and I know we were in crossover condition and high speed, high winds forecasted to 2200. So I kind of quickly recalculated and estimated that the fire would reach Fort Smith by 2200. So the thing was, and then Marty's asking how did we clock the wind? That was the pilot from his like helicopter instrument that gave us that reading. So yeah, and then so I guess we decided to focus, and I'm gonna pass it on to Jay, but we were like, the thing was like the winds from the weather station on the ground were just kind of not aligning with you know, with different. So we thought, well, let's take a closer look at what the upper air analysis was doing and try to wrap our head around some of the concept we've learned in the courses. And so I'll pass it on to Jay.
Yeah, thanks, then, Claude. Yeah, so I wanted to sort of just do a retrospect, a bit of analysis on looking at the weather. So I wanted to take the the funnel approach that we learned from Matt, sort of looking at weather for the day. So looking at the big picture down to the surface level. So looking at that vertical approach, I pulled the T-skew or tephrogram here from the University of Wyoming. And also use the new tool they're putting it in the Excel sheet to sort of try to get an understanding of what was actually happening on that date. Unfortunately, this one is it's from 6 p.m. So it's kind of in the middle of that run though. So I'm not so it's what we have to sort of work with. But the thing that stands out here, if you look at the profile here on the temperature one on the right, you've got this it's angling towards the left quite a bit, and so that's the first sign that there's a very unstable atmosphere up to about 700 pressure, and so that upper and the second thing that's quite noticeable here is the wind speeds are very high. So this is like 40 knots, so 75 kilometers. So lots of upper level winds, instability. If you translate that over, you can kind of see those the wind speed, the knots, up to about 40 knots. And there's also some fairly dry air near the surface here, at the surface and near surface. So that these two things may come into or likely came into play with what happened on that day. The next thing I wanted to look at was the sort of the mid-level analysis is sort of at the 500 millibar chart. So I pulled up a few past ones to sort of look. We've got this, you know, a variation of a mega block that we sort of saw in this region for most of the summer. There was upper ridging to the south, and then there was a rapidly developing low here just to the north. I put an arrow here along this 570 line that goes sort of straight across through the location that we're talking about, and then this is sort of responsible for this strong west to east winds that influenced several fires on that date. There was also a frontal zone passage early in the evening here that comes into play. So another thing I wanted to quickly look at was just a satellite photo, just to see what basically what we can
1
take away
minute.
what we can take away from here is a wind shear affecting the smoke column, and that there's no cumulonimbus development with that sort of wind on that date. So yeah, observed on the ground, we didn't see the wind speeds or we didn't record anything higher than 55, gusting 55, more steady 25. So what we wanted to do is just sort of look, and I'll turn it back to Anne-Claude, who did a few runs to look and see if we could try to model what actually the run that happened using Prometheus. So back to you, Anne-Claude. You're on mute.
My God. So quickly, the yellow line is like Prometheus, like our basic with the actual weather station reading, weather stream reading, which aligned pretty closely to what I had projected that day. And I just played with some weather patch, like quickly with like just putting landscape patch if the winds were sustained at 40 or 45 or sustained at 60. So those are the red and orange line compared to the background, like red, which is the actual progression. So you can see it still doesn't quite, you know, align with the projection for that finger, but on the other hand, it over projects to the north and to the south. So that doesn't quite explain. We figure there's some like long range spotting also at play there. There might be an influence of that, like we talk about that eastern. There was also an active column there to the southeast, like maybe there's interaction between columns. So there's lots of, like we're in extreme drought, there's maybe fuel factor. So there's a lot to unpack, and we didn't have time in this presentation, but we just wanted to use some of the tools like Prometheus and look at upper analysis, and this is what we got.
And that's time. Time plus.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions. Wow. I was going to say, Norma, you have questions, so you can delay your presentation. No questions. Going once. Going twice. That's it. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Anne-Claude.
Thank you.
Next person up is Mr. Ian Staley.
Okay, thanks. I'll get my share the screen. Hopefully.
And you're up.
I'm sharing. Okay, right on. Goodness.
Okay, you're good.
Okay, thanks. Well, good day, folks. This presentation is on the McDougall Creek fire, largely focusing on the big spread event day on August 17th last year. I was assigned to the fire with an incident management team, but only in the later stages, well into September. I would cut out of British Columbia on September 28th, but got a good chance while there to look around and observe a lot of the fire effects and look a little bit at that time into the circumstances of the fire. So through it here. So the start date on that fire was August 15th, around 1800, cause undetermined, thought to be recreational, but not sure yet. Suppression efforts were ongoing while the fire was still small during the period prior to the big run days. Fuels, you can see C7, there was lots of C5, C3 in the area. Well-cured grasses and marsh meadows, harvest blocks that of different ages. Not too much slash really, but some, and a lot of young regen blocks. So its point of origin was west of Lake Okanagan, west of West Kelowna, by about 7 or 8 kilometers there. And it ultimately got on that side of Lake Okanagan to be almost 15,000 hectares. It did jump over that Lake Okanagan in its narrower stretches. Those are not thought to be independently started fires. They're thought to be spot fires from that main fire. Numerous structures were lost. Lots of neighborhoods were lost. Heavy damage. Multi-million dollar piles of rubble were left, including the Lake Okanagan Resort, and all the way down to further into to Glen Rosa and some of the other communities. A picture on the left that is provided by one of the meteorologists that from her home in Kelowna. I think just prior to the time when they departed that area. Lots of social disruption and economic disruption as well. So on the 17th, the actuals at 1300, 31 degree temperatures, and RHs were getting down to 23. So the FFMC up to 95, so very low fuel moisture and atmospheric moisture. The West Kelowna weather station, it's indicated that you can see it, but it's burnt all around it near to the water station there in West Kelowna, near one of the communities. Speaking to fire effects, you can see the result of that, the high drought codes. Maybe I'll just back up one here. Oops, shit. And looking at the drought code there, 1223 by that time in the season, BUI 286, the FWI 47 at that time, or for 1700 that day of the 17th. But looking at some of the days preceding and following there, you can see also very elevated ISIs and FWIs, and the BUI just continuing to climb. So the result was lots of deep burning areas in that fire area. Lots of extinguishment problems. So I wanted to look at the terrain effects of that area, because it's unique, it's complex. There's a lot of rugged terrain. So the fire area is east of the Thompson Plateau and part of the Okanagan Valley, bounded on the east by the Columbia Mountain Range and the Coastal Mountains on the east. So quite a big elevation difference from where that fire is thought to have started down to the surface of Lake Okanagan, like over 1,000 meter difference from that down to lake surface. Lake surface being at about 340 and up at the top there being around 13 to 1400. And interestingly, as I looked at this image, you can see that little smoke puffer down there, which could, well, in my estimation, depending on the currency of that of this Google image, be that fire, this fire, when it was small. Up for debate, I suppose, but it's sure in the right approximate spot. You can see the rugged terrain, heavily rifted, lots of gullies, lots of valleys, steep slopes, and from that last image, it did show slope percent going down to West Kelowna to Lake Okanagan, 45% slopes, and that's pretty typical. Lots of cliff faces and bluffs, and as I say, lots of gullies. You can see in one of these other shots the rugged terrain in the back there. Lots of ridges. That's the shot on the right's looking north up Lake Okanagan. That's a bit of a plateau, and the central, most of the central part of the fire was comprised of a plateau and then bounded on north and south by gullies and other burns to the north as well. As was alluded to, when I went looking for weather data, I was told that well, it cost me $118 an hour to retrieve that data. So I went looking at other area or for other sources, and utilizing the University of Wyoming site quite a bit there. So August 16th, you can see the heavy dew point temperature or the significant temperature dew point spread at this, and dry air continuing aloft. At this point, winds were not overly strong, moderate aloft, I'd say, but not overly strong, and at the surface, not overly strong either. Putting the text data from University of Wyoming into RAYOB, myself and the weather technician produced some of these charts, which were fairly illustrative. And so looking again prior to the big spread event day, August 16th at 5 o'clock, you know, just seeing, we're going to just want to go through this and look at how that progressed. Again, winds aloft, not terribly strong, starting to mix down, and surface winds mostly out of the south, moderate at that point still. That's in the morning. That surface inversion, I guess we call that a weak surface inversion, present. And that corresponded, as best I could tell, looking at firms, to the fire size. This is what it looked like in firms. The at approximately almost noon on the 16th. Again, I'm not quite sure. This is maybe acquisition time, but I think still it approximates fire size kind of midday on the 16th. And we can see on this, this is from the NOAA site, looking up in the top left corner, you can see that the front way up in, I guess, south of the Gulf of Alaska, but offshore of British Columbia and Alaska, and as well just pretty slack gradients here over the fire area.
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, here we go. 1700 on the 16th. Will very dry and hot on the surface. Fire's growing. And the front is starting to move down closer. This is in the morning. Night of the 17th, peak burn. Again, very dry air over the fire area. Winds very strong aloft. And we see that front moving right into the fire area by the evening of the 17th. Fire's growing significantly, as indicated here, across the lake. And this is by the morning of the 18th, this has all occurred. again, at 5 o'clock on the 18th, it did not cool off overnight. This is really significant. And the temperatures at surface, very warm and very dry, strong winds, almost right up the profile. You can see the hourlies here at RH of 10 at 11 o'clock, and it did not recover overnight and immediately became significantly warmer. Fronts moved through by 5 o'clock on the 18th and stayed dry right through the day, dry and warm. Continuation, what I'd like to look at more are the terrain effects, the funneling effects, the channeling, eddy effects, broad landscape effects, and looking more at upstream weather and ideally being on site to do observations. And I was provided this. I think this is all the school solution, as we might say. This is from Christina Van Eaton. She provided it later after I'd done most of this presentation because I didn't want to be biased by what she had to say. But did she ever nail the forecast for the next day for the 17th? In my opinion, the current indications are for peak winds of the front to occur with peak burn, and it sure did. So that front passage time was, I think in her verbal forecast, she really nailed that too. So I just wanted to include that. That's it. I guess that 10 minutes went by quick. Thanks.
Are there any questions? Oh, Brett, go ahead.
Got a little bit more of a esoteric one for you, Ian. That weather station that you had in West Kelowna, because it had been burnt all around it, have you had an opportunity to take a look at the weather data that's coming out of that station since then to see if there's been a change in the way that it's detecting wind because of that little strip of trees that are blocking between the unburned and burned area? I would make the assumption that there would be kind of a wave effect, and it might be dumping excessive wind onto that station, and it may over-report for the next little while.
I haven't had a chance to look at it, being in Ontario, but during that time I was out there, I think we stopped getting data from that station, and then we had some quick deploys set up north and south on the fire, and we're relying more so on those than that station. But winds I think could have been skewed, and I think that's pretty reasonable to assume that it was getting some other kind of terrain effect over the hill coming down on it. But yeah. If that comes close to answering your question.
Mr. Parakis. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
Hey, Ian. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I just wondered about that upper air tool you were using. Obviously not one we looked at in the course, but I think when you were playing with, you said with your weather tech there, do you have any sense how that compares to the ones that we played with, whether it's just the upper air spreadsheet tool or looking at the, skew tees or anything like that?
Well, what we found interesting looking at it, and you could see it from some of those slides that it and I'm not sure how it does it exactly, but it places those the fronts in that profile, whether they're fronts aloft and some of the surface surface and other inversions aloft. So I guess it models those. I hadn't used that for quite a while, and then we were sort of rediscovering it, I guess. And I hope to use it more. The weather tech, he was questioning as to the placement of a couple of those fronts in that tool, I guess. So, but I think it was accurate in terms of the timing of the front and when it showed up using the University of Wyoming sounding into that tool, which you could just take that data and transfer it in. So hope to use it more.
Matt?
Yeah, I just thought I'd add some intel. Great presentation there, Ian.
Thanks.
With regards to, the winds in that area are a problem. Like, I remember issuing spot forecasts for that fire, and we were all kind of scratching our heads. Like, if you zoomed in even more, there's a number of creeks that feed into that specific area, and we were seeing some funny, almost like a katabatic cooling downslope wind at night. And definitely a lot of turbulent eddies like spinning in and around. But with that cold front passage there that day, yeah, both prefrontal and postfrontal winds were exceptionally strong. And then Dan, just to answer your question with that RAYOB software, so we utilize that as well at BC Wildfire as forecasters. So it's like a tephigram viewing software. And then just distinguishing between like a real sounding, like from a true weather balloon, and then we pay, as I'm sure other agencies do, we pay Environment Canada for like a high resolution model set. And so you can go forward in time, we call it prog TEFI, and look at forecasted soundings, but appreciating that it's from a model, right? So it's not reality, it's just what a model is suggesting. And then there's a package within that RAYOB software that does in fact try to analyze, like guess where the front may be. But that's definitely to be taken with a grain of salt. Yeah. Stop ranting.
That's
Any
it for
other-
me.
Oh,
Well, I
no,
was just gonna-
not yet. Not yet. Any other questions for Ian? 1, 2, 3. Go ahead, Ian.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think there's, it's been noted too that and looking at some of the photos of boats getting beaten up on Lake Okanagan, that there's a strong funneling effect north to south down the lake. That'd be correct, Matt?
Yeah, totally. Like typically in the middle of the lake, it's a little easier to forecast the winds because it does that either due north or due south. And that Trepanier split, basically the Trepanier Creek runs parallel to Highway 97 down in Summerland. And then as that wind comes pouring down the Trepanier Creek, it essentially splits both north towards Kelowna and south towards Penticton. So on the very same day, Penticton will be reporting, north winds 20 to 30 kilometers an hour, and Kelowna will be reporting south winds 20 to 30 kilometers an hour. So yeah, it's a really tricky spot to forecast winds for.
Yeah, right on. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian.
Hey, Dana, I can't help but notice we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which isn't a bad thing. Just wondered if, I don't know.
We want to push on or take a few-minute break?
No, I don't think we need to take a break. I think we push on. Just wondered, I guess we have a few more, we could be a little more relaxed with questions and stuff if people want more discussion. Yeah.
Normand, you are up, sir.
Here I am. Okay. Oops. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. I want you to apologize, Francois, because Francois had to take care of his kids this afternoon. So I'm alone, not really alone. There's a guy behind me. He's going to be a future F-band, and I hope to be help. I want to help him to get that level before I get retired. Okay, I start with the fire. I choose that fire. We choose that fire because I'm chasing events that where fires done more than my paradigm I have, and that paradigm is 35 kilometers per day in one cycle. So we choose that fire for that reason. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Okay. Objective. I'm gonna talk about the objective, the inputs. We concentrate our effort on Prometheus 3 days weather observed versus hotspots from Ororatec, some comparison and conclusion comments. Okay. That fire had been ignited. Oh, the first picture you saw of the fire, it was the 6th day of the fire run, and that's where it was. Okay, that fire have been ignited by a lightning and start June 14th in James Bay area, and it was a part of the biggest fire we ever had in Quebec, over 1 million hectares. Two big fire merged together to get that. Okay, the fire is considered a threat for the road, hydroelectric complex, airport, transmission towers, for native cabins. That's it. There was a lot of value at risk there for that region. Topography is gently rolling. There's no big hills, big mountain there. Gentle rolling. Fuel, it's half and half. When it's open, it's a C1. When it's closed, it's a C2. The picture is really representative of the fire there. The fuel there. It's jack pine and lichens. That's it. There's not a lot of spruce, there's almost no deciduous trees there. And the carpet of lichens goes from 5 centimeters to 15 centimeters. I figure that the fire regime there, it's about maybe 150 years. It's a guess I'm doing. Okay, that summer we had abnormally dry weather summer. We're talking in that region, we had 15 days in a row without a significant rain. And I mean significant means over 0.6 millimeters. The last significant rainfall was June 10th. And for the rest of the summer, no rain. Fire danger indices, they are there, FFMC 92, FWI 24, and for the period that I'm looking for, I will show you the RH minimum was around 15 to 20, and maximum, it never goes over 66. For the FWI, we're talking about something between 62 and 65 in that period. So it was very dry. And we had some BOI over what we expect, or we're seeing usually 64 usually is the maximum. During that summer we reached something in some place in that area, some numbers over 100. It was the first time I'm seeing that in Quebec in 35 years. Okay, we perform one 3-day projection with Prometheus to compare and see how is it going, and observe weather. We use an hotspot detected by satellite, and we get it from Ororatec. Inputs, the specialist forecast was prepared on June 19, very early in the morning. The period covers from the 19th to the 23rd. We made some adjustments during we built it. The observed weather data comes from station 724, located 20 kilometers north of the origin of the fire. And the fire did many kilometers toward east. You'll see that in the next few moments. This is the fuel plate. As you can see, light green is C1, dark green is C2. So it goes in that thing. The orange area you're seeing south of it, these are all burning. Okay, first run, June, for the first 24 hours, Prometheus shows 11 kilometers spread in that direction here. Okay, Next day, it reached the reservoir, LG3 reservoir, and then start to contour. The weather station was located there. And there was an airport there. And you heard about some people that have been entrapped in a fire last summer. It was 6 people. It was in that area from other fire in that area. The next, and we built it from observed weather. We had rashes to get the weather and to put it in connect it with Prometheus because there was some problem. So the exercise we did got a great benefit for the software because those problem with the transfer the data from the database to Prometheus, there was some bug. They are fixed now. Okay, and then 21 to the 22nd in 24 hours, the fire did 28 kilometers from the Prometheus perspective, and 22 to the 23rd, only 14 kilometers. That is the Prometheus projection. Compared to the hotspot from Ororatic, it did 26 kilometers in 24 hours there. And here we in yellow, we can see it goes up there. But the next day we saw some red spot here. In that part, I figure that it was the smoke plume, that part. So that 47 kilometers may be 37. That's something we learned, and that is something I saw in Fraser Lake many years ago. The hotspot showed the fire 7 kilometers further than it was when I was there. And then for the last day, last spread event, for the 22nd to the 23rd, it does from here to there 21 kilometer. If you had the 10, maybe it did 31 kilometers. We learned from that study something. As you can see, we can maybe make a kind of ellipse there, and the length to breast ratio seems to me to be something like 1:5. So I figure some winds around 50 kilometers per hour. Oh, so what we learned, some comments about the fire. The forecast made with the observed weather using Prometheus gives a smaller area burn than what was observed on with Aurora hotspots. That's what we saw. Smoke plume may have been interpreted by satellite as hotspots. As I told you, I wasn't surprised to see it. At 10 kilometers, it gives me a number. I saw 7 kilometers before, so I like it. It just gives me some confirmation that the smoke plume may be included into the hotspots. Winds were 35, gusting 40 in that region, but around there we got some. Okay, this is the maximum we get, but on the weather station, the 724, the maximum we got it was 26, gusting 47. That's not enough to have that kind of fire as long as that one. But I have no evidence on the terrain about a low-level jet stream. We didn't take the time to check for the upper air sounding profile. Maybe we can find something there. if we want to go further, but I don't want to go further because the next specialist course, Alain Saint-Onge, he gonna takes that fire, so I don't want to, how would you say that? Make his mind. He will make his own analyze about that. Highest nighttime relative humidity, as I said, was around 50 to 60, so it was burning all night long and spreading almost all night long. ISI, the lowest I saw it was 6 during all that period. Using, and we did a lot of projection before being well to do it. And we saw that obstacles like rivers, road, out the fire progression, as indicated by Prometheus projection, we can see it. And what about the fuel map? The fuel map is accurate from our perspective. And as I told you, the biggest benefit we had, we fixed some problem that we had with our system. And I finally learned to do some Prometheus projections. So I learned a lot. I'm proud of it. And do you have any question?
Yeah, questions for Noma? I noticed in the chat, Marty said that, so the length of breath ratio is about 5 to 1. So
5 to 1, it makes some
pretty good winds for sure.
Yeah, around 60 kilometers
Yeah.
per hour. Oops, I think I lost you.
Oh. Oh, you're still there.
Yeah, but I tried to find, okay.
Yeah. Any questions from Noma? We have time.
I think we can.
Oh,
let's
there's
go
Dan. Mr. Parakas.
All these presentations are so great. There's so much that comes to mind. Merci Normand pour la belle présentation. You mentioned the fuel structure as jack pine, all jack pine. You said very little spruce with lichen underneath, and you said that's a perfect fit with C2. I have not been on a fire in Quebec ever, but I think jack pine with lichen underneath would maybe get most people thinking about C1 or C3 or something. Do you have experience that C2 really works, or is it a very low crown base height, or what's your reasoning for that fuel type?
I was looking for the fuel load because the thickness of the lichens, even if the crown don't touch to the ground, it's easy to have some crown fire there.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty fast. It's common to have continuous crown fires, and often it takes that time to go from a surface fire to a continuous crown fire in those conditions. And there's a lot of lichens, and there's a lot of dead wood in it or around it. So, and it was so dry, all the trees, the dead trees that big lying on the ground, they were dry. If I was kicking them, I was able to break them. So it was the first time I seen that in that region. I saw it in Mackenzie, but there no. Mackenzie in BC, but there no. It was the first time I was seeing that. It's the first time I saw those weather condition in 35 years.
Let's see.
So for the fuel load, I think they're pretty good. Maybe it's a bit higher, a little bit higher. I suppose that maybe we got some low-level jet in that area. We had a lot of these events last summer. Like I'm looking for another fire. I thought that the fire did 51 kilometers in one burning cycle, but I'm sure that there was low-level jet stream there because I have some evidence.
Any more questions for Norma? They're letting you off easy, Norma.
Thank you.
Thank you,
No,
Norma.
I'll just point
Oh.
out that under the very high indices that you mentioned, winds of 40, 50, 60 kilometers an hour, we'd have to do the math, but I think there's very little difference in C2 and C3 at those levels anyway,
Yes.
right? Because forecast ground fire.
Yeah.
So,
And it's hard for me to talk about C3 there because the biggest, yes, we have some trees that big, but less than 50 per hectare. So it's not the size is not good enough to be a C3. But anyway, as you said, at those level, it's about the same thing.
yeah.
Oh, Ian.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, good day, Norm. I'm just curious, you mentioned the Aurora Tech satellite there. Is that, could you just talk about that a bit?
Oh yes, Aurora. This is I think it's from Europe, and I can show you Aurora Tech. It takes some all the data from different satellite, and you have it from everywhere. So in French we say un agrégateur d'information. So it aggregate information from different source and it provides it to us. It's from Europe. It's very expensive. We're very lucky. I tried to open the firm's Aurora Tech. I would like to show you. Okay, there it is. Okay. Satellite. Aurora Tech. Partager. Oops. Okay. I agree. Not now. Close. Okay. So you can draw an area and then you can have some advice as soon as a hotspot light in that area. Like I have the area where I was working for it is that area there, all the north, and that's where the fire is. The biggest fire at the end did burn all of it. It's about over 1 million hectares, and then if I ask for the hotspot for user data. Satellite hybrid. Okay, I have to change the date. Where is it? Okay, here. If I ask for 23 July from 1st to the end of the month. Okay, wait. There. We have to wait, and then there was more than that. Okay, those are the fire. They are not the. These are not the hotspots. Anyway, this is the logiciel we use, the Aurora Tech wildfire solution. That's
okay. Right on. Thank you very much. Merci.
Any other questions for Norma? Perfect. Thank you, Norma.
It was a great.
Okay, everybody, fasten your seatbelt. The whiz kids are up. Jordan and Brett.
Ooh.
This is a bit of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. I'm hopeful that this will work nicely. Yeah, this will work great. So Jordan and I went through a process of comparing Firestar to Prometheus. It is a real fire, but we were not concerned with how the models were comparing to the real fire. We just wanted to take a set of realistic conditions, run the two models as close to an apples to apples comparison as we could, and then compare the outputs. So we'll start with a bit of a overview or reminder as to how these two structures function. At the end of the day, it's two implementations of a similar spread method. Firestar is considered a point-based wavelet approximation, whilst Prometheus is vector-based wavelet spread. So as far as Firestar is concerned, you can see from that little animation, the star is kind of the initial point where a fire has started, and then it spreads, and then each of those red dots become new ignition points to spread wavelets again, or ellipses. And then it uses a hulling method to take the outer diameter or the outer perimeter of that spread to generate the next step, where we would then have new fires igniting. Prometheus does much the same, except it's along a polygonal edge, and it adds vertices in as that polygon spreads to ensure that no two vertexes are further than a set distance apart. I can't remember what that distance is right now because we've been tweaking that a lot in the last kind of 5 years here to try to define how fine is fine enough. Initially, it was, I think he had it set to like 10 meters, which is pretty ridiculously fine when you start modeling really large fire. And that's where you get into challenges with performance. Yeah, the other thing to say with spread within Firestar is currently it's set to spread based on a fraction of a cell for a calculation step. So for something like a 20 meter per minute fire, that means it'll spread for 2.5 minutes per calculation within a 100-meter cell. So it is doing that subcellular math. So it's not a true cellular automata. It's more advanced in the way that it's doing its calculations. It's resampling as it goes. Some of the other differences that aren't immediately apparent when you're just looking at these two tools. FireSpread has a start-stop condition of sunrise and sunset. It also requires a minimum FMC to achieve spread, 65 in the day, 85 in the night. These are things that Jordan has just set through experience in watching fires burn. If the FFMC exceeds that nighttime threshold, it can still spread in the night, even if it's after sunset. It's just a little bit harder to do. And that tool is fully open source, and the repository is there if you ever really want to get into the guts of how it's working. Prometheus, there are no spread limitations unless explicitly set. It can make use of vector fuel breaks, can make use of wind grids, can use multiple fire stations, weather stations, and breaching is explicitly built in. Whereas with something like Firestar, you would just need a really aggressive fire to get it over a barrier. That or we would need to do some changing in the background in order to set that, but it's not something that's explicitly manipulable by the user. So the way that we were looking at these two structures was through an ensemble approach. So we took weather from the global ensemble prediction system, which is 21 members, a control, and then 20 perturbations. And we simulated that for each of those members in order to create a probability surface. So you take each of those layers of shapes, slam them all together, and build this raster that gives you an idea of where is the most likely area to burn and where is the least likely area to burn. In order to try to get this as close to apples as we could, Prometheus had a burning condition set so that burning would only perform or only occur between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. That was to try to emulate the sunrise sunset effects in Firestar. This fire happened in early August, so I went and checked the early August charts for Alberta to get those values. One of the things that we noticed immediately was that Prometheus was working its way around something in the fuel grid. You can see that strange white patch in the southeast corner. In that zone, the fuels were defined as 900, which is an M3, M4 fuel with no percent dead fir. And we've been kind of racking our brains as to how is this being interpreted by Prometheus, because that D1 kicker that exists in the M3, M4 is likely dropping spread to almost zero. That also led us to question, okay, how is Firestar interpreting it? Is there something weird going on here? So this is where now we'll get to more of the what are our next steps later on. But this is one of the things where the second we looked at this, we're like, hey, we got more to look at here because there's something going on. One of the notable components of this was the total performance of these two tools. For everything that Firestar built, that all took 51 seconds. For me to replicate that in Prometheus took about 2 hours. The simulation itself took an hour, and the outputs took about an hour. It's not to say that, faster is better or slower is more accurate. It's just an interesting noticing as we've been working through these tools. And these fires were all ranging between 1,000 and 20,000 hectares. So we did have some fairly substantial spread. So then if we take our second to take a look at how each of these tools were spreading, these GIFs should loop a number of times here. You can see the spread is fundamentally different between the two tools. But what I am happy to see are things like when it is spreading, both are spreading, and when it is not spreading, both are not spreading, which is a good indication that the weather is being interpreted fairly similarly. And maybe it's the application of the weather to the CFF-DRS formulae that is struggling or is discrepant. So these sources of discrepancy, why is this happening? The few that we kind of figured out or thought of right quickly were, how are each of these tools actually interpreting the fuels? How are each of these tools interpreting the weather? And are there other inconsistencies in burning conditions that we haven't already accounted for? One of the challenges with the weather interpretation is I don't have faith that Prometheus isn't altering my weather when I put it in. I did a quick assessment between the actual weather that I gave it and then the weather that Prometheus was using, and I was out by a couple of points here and there where FFM or FWI in the data stream was 27, but FWI in Prometheus was 31. And I don't have a good explanation as to why that was happening. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm sure that there's other issues under the hood for both tools. We just haven't considered or thought of them just yet. So how do we get close to solving this problem? One of the next steps is to do a comparison on constant grids. So a single field type, no slope, same aspect, same weather conditions, and it's a single weather condition so that we don't have any of that variability of a real world scenario. So then we can start to say, okay, is Prometheus growing a fatter ellipse, or is Firestar accelerating more quickly than Prometheus is, and that's why we're getting out of that initial cell a little bit quicker. It seems like acceleration was the key there, because Jordan made faces that anyhow.
Yeah, there's no acceleration in Firestar. That's something I completely forgot about, because probabilistically it normally wouldn't spread if it was low. But when you run it deterministically, it's just going to take off immediately. So that's probably a huge factor.
Could be. It shouldn't matter after the first hour. That's kind of how Prometheus achieves equilibrium spread anyway. And then our other step is to assess the FPP calculations just at a base. Prometheus has an FPP calculator baked into it, so we can do a quick check to say, is this doing the math the same way in both tools? This is also a great test case for our modeling framework. We're in the process right now of building a system that effectively allows you to feed an input set and then choose what model you want to simulate it in. And that will ensure that everything going into each of the tools is exactly the same. And that will give us a much more rigorous multi-fire approach to this kind of testing. And yeah, that's what we've been up to for the last couple of weeks.
Burning questions for Brett and Jordan.
Oh, the one note I had from the slide where you're talking about burning conditions, we did notice that Firestar was spreading a bit at night. Generally, that doesn't happen when you're running it in probabilistic mode, because the 85 FFMC doesn't mean it automatically spreads. It means that it has a chance of spreading based on like the chance of a spread event. But I guess in deterministic mode, I hadn't thought about that, and it's just going at whatever speed it would be going as if the FFMC is above 85 at night. So if we wanted to be closer to Prometheus and actually stop it at sunset, we would just crank the nighttime FFMC up in the settings, and then should be a little closer at least. Greg?
Yeah, really interesting. Really happy to see that. So thank you. I wonder if there's any background work that's a comparison of Firestar and Prometheus, or is this the first work kind of of its kind to compare the two?
Yeah, we haven't really. So Dan Boychuk is in the process of writing a paper to kind of explain the algorithm, and we were going to do a little bit more of an analysis. This is kind of the first attempt at comparing the two directly. And it's a weird comparison because Firestar was never intended to be run deterministically. But in theory, they should produce the exact same results if you are running it on FPP as just like use it as is. So there's definitely something going on that's not quite the same, which needs to be explored. So we will be doing that, and that's the good thing about it being an open model, is we can do whatever the hell we need to do to make it right. And well, and also there is is Prometheus right versus is it? So does matching Prometheus mean we're right, or does matching the red book mean we're right, or how do you interpret what right is? Does it match a fire that actually happened, or does it produce the exact same thing you would get from the red book? Yeah. The fire is always right, but the weather is probably wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thanks, really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Brett or Jordan? Kelsey.
Okay. Thanks for that. That was good. It was probably a more simplistic question. Just given what you learned, and that looked quick, but like the analysis that you've been working on over the last couple of weeks, what do you think the applications of that are for the plethora of fire modeling tools that are starting to appear out there? Do you have any recommendations from what you learned, say in terms of parameterization or I don't know, how are we going to keep track of like these pretty obvious differences that you've come across? How do we keep track of that across all the tools across the board? Any thoughts? You don't have to give a solution, just a thought.
No, it's a fair question, and so this is the first time, second time, because I did this comparison against Delta Fire as well. But this is a part of developing a standard for comparing models against one another, so that we can start to say, what actually is our discrepancy factor in between these tools, and how does that relate back to the ground? So the first stage of this will be defining how to actually compare models against one another. And the second stage will be taking each of these models and measuring their performance against the ground. Because if we can start to say, okay, this model is, 80% accurate against the ground, and these two models have a 30% discrepancy, perhaps you don't actually need to do a full ensemble the way that we have. You can do one run from each of these tools, and you get enough of a difference that now you have a bit of that probabilistic layer without doing this incredibly intensive multi-simulation run.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Dan, your question. Yeah, so I would be comfortable with the way we intended to use Firestar originally, because it was never intended to be an accurate, like on the ground simulation of the actual fire perimeter. It was always meant to be what is the scope of the risk that we are looking at with this this area. So it was mostly intended to be kind of a triaging tool where you would look at everything across the landscape and comparatively say, where's the biggest risk? What do we actually need a person to look at? Because we know a model's not going to do it right, but at least this one might say, oh, this little tiny fire that we don't think anything is going to happen, actually in some scenarios it screws off on us, so we should have someone look at that and see what's going to happen for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go and say, this is the line on the map that I came up with, therefore we did this, but it was definitely a good situational awareness kind of thing, and that I think we succeeded with that. It's trying to take that leap to how do you apply this as a general model to a specific fire, and what does it mean when you run it probabilistically, and how accurate do the outputs need to be? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I remember debating that very actively when we were using PFAS a few years ago in BC. And PFAS has some, definite problems, which is why it got nixed from operational use, like a lot of hard-coded stuff that didn't make sense. Like you couldn't use DMC over 99 and stuff like that. But it was a similar probabilistic approach. And I remember the arm waving that was required to get crews to understand that it wasn't a fire perimeter, but this is the probability area, you expect sort of fires to be, and then at the end of the day, kind of like, all right, the areas that are 70-80% are probably more likely to burn than the areas that are 20-30%. And is that sort of something very similar to that, kind of how you would assume, a Firestar sort of quick and dirty interpretation guide would have to go, something like that?
Yeah, if you're the original way we applied it was we had like a values map, and we would do so it doesn't just do the probability of each cell burning, it does the probability of each cell burning with an intensity range.
Yeah.
And then we got some SMEs to kind of give us, given a moderate intensity fire and a road, like what impact would you expect, or a building, or those kind of things. And then we came up with kind of a table of with this amount of intensity applied to these things that are on the landscape at this probability, what is the total risk score that you come up with for the area? So it was kind of it wasn't so much about specifically what part is going to happen. It's like, how much is this area in general at risk versus other similar areas?
Yeah, that part is unique to Firestar, and it's really interesting. So yeah, good job and nice presentation, guys. Thanks.
We also had a similar conversation about that there yesterday, where I was thinking about how do we define probability envelopes that are more likely under certain weather conditions. And then I realized I was basically refactoring things back into Prometheus land, where you had a single perimeter. So it's not to say that that's a bad way to do it, because that might be more interpretable by within the operations community. But it might also be useful to continue to show the like full probability with a, based on today's weather, we expect the 65th percent probability to be achieved, or something to that effect. Whereas, you know, it shows the inherent unreliability of how these fire models are actually interpreting the world, but it also gives us a way of refining the output before we have, you know, better models that are like fuel models that are going in, because our limitations tend to be that we're simplifying the world, and the simpler you go, the less accurate you can really be. Which is okay, because if simple is quick and quick is good enough, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Perfect. Thank you, Brett and Jordan. Just for everybody else, there will be a quiz on this presentation later in the course. Next up, we have Evan.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just gonna get myself set up here 1 second and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. I will begin. So my presentation is on the Donnie Creek fire in Northeast BC in the Prince George Fire Center. There it is in relation to Fort Nelson and Fort St. John, and just some lesson learned with a few Prometheus runs here and some weather analysis. So getting right into it, this is my first view of Donnie Creek heading up the Fire 97 on June 3rd of last year. We took over from a previous IMT. This is the perimeter. As of June 3rd, it's got that classic Wu-Tang shape, and like the Wu-Tang Clan, Donnie Creek was certainly nothing to fuck with. At the time, it was 240,000 hectares, and ended up being closer to 500,000 hectares by the time of the end of my deployment. And is we'll get some stats towards the end of where it currently stands, because it burned throughout the winter. So the day before we arrived, or the day we arrived, the previous IMT did a large-scale ignitions, bringing this new perimeter shape. And this is the area of origin of the fire. And this is the area we'll kind of be studying through this series of Prometheus runs. So I was the FN at the time. This is the fuel model or fuel database that I used in Prometheus. As you can see, this is our subject area. This is a drawn in perimeter and ignition profile based on MODIS data that we obtained and verified by flights on the morning of June 5th. And you can see the fuels around that area predominantly C2 fuels, so that classic boreal spruce in this area. Moving forward, because I got a lot to cover here. This is the BC specific provincial fuel grid. So if you notice any differences between the national fuel grid, that would explain it. So on that day, taking the RDPS model run and using the silver station, which for some reason, it's interesting examining this back. I actually did this for Prometheus in the field at the time, and I reran it for the course of this and discovered several errors and have several questions. Of course, my notes are locked in a provincial binder somewhere, so I don't have access to them to why I plotted the weather station there. But this is where the actual weather station is, and this is where I did my spot weather forecast, trying to gain a more equilateral example of weathers throughout the fire. Because I only have a consumer grade laptop, I only ran this section for the purposes of this presentation. So we'll just have to deal with that. But yeah, this is RDPS model with a 1.5 kilometer wind adjust based on conversations with the Southeast or the Prince George Fire Center forecaster. He felt that the weather stream showed a little bit too low. And my growth conditions are FWI 19, ISI of 7, and that's based on conversations with the previous F-band. And all of these models ran using the Van Wagner approach to FFMC calculations. So moving forward, I reran this using the silver actuals for the time period, this June 5th to the 7th, 11 o'clock to 2300. And as you can see, very similar conditions. Now there's a station off to the northeast, Patty, which had at the time significantly higher BUIs, DCs, and DMC values. I should mention that prior to the ignitions, this area received about 6 millimeters of rain on June 3rd, so just enough to knock a few things back. But by the point of this simulation, we're fully into recovery of those. So yeah, kind of matched up. And then Patty's values here, we've got roughly 20 kilometers and about 24 to 30 hectares just in this area. Ignore this area down here. Worth of growth expected. So matching that against what actually happened, we have what occurred on the 6th, and we have what occurred on the 7th. And when we look at that compared to my most aggressive model using the actuals from Patty, we see quite a discrepancy. And that comes out to be more like 20, well, it's matched the northern growth very well, 20 kilometers, but we have more like 30 kilometers of easterly growth here that was unanticipated. And we're looking at more like 50,000 hectares as opposed to 2530. So why did that happen? If we look and match that up with the NASA firms data, we see significant growth there. Again, not greatest scale, but I was rushed in getting this information. You can see from some historic GOES East satellites on the evening of the 6th into the morning of the 7th. This is our fire here. You can see under this cloud cover quite a bit of smoke production and quite a bit of growth. And based on the other columns in BC or other fires started to the south, you can get an idea that it's a pretty good day for fire growth. Haines index for the morning of this or after evening of the 6th into the 7th showed we were in moderate, the high end of moderate, 8. Atmospheric soundings from Fort Nelson showed that we were more into the 10 or high category. So a little bit of difference between our provincial records. And you can see we've got some pretty good unstable atmosphere here from Fort Nelson, which is about 160 kilometers to the northeast of our fires location. So actually pretty representative. When I take some historic weather for that period, looking at temperature versus dew point, yeah, there is some overnight low dew points, not a crazy huge variation, but when I look back at this, most of that growth occurred overnight. So it basically doubled my prediction because we had double the length of burning period. And when I look at that, I don't see a huge indicator from overnight temperature dew point differentials. And I also don't see a huge amount of overnight winds. This is the Patty and Silver stations. The blue is silver gusts. There were no gusts really from the Patty station. But it did maintain 8 to 5 kilometers an hour overnight, and temperatures, we didn't get great. I didn't plot humidity, I should have, but we didn't get great recoveries, more like 50 to 60%. And a really crazy story here is the overnight FFMC maintained into the high 80s and 90s, and our ISI, while not being extreme, you know, the red book shows based on these values that kind of maintained in C2 9 meters per minute overnight rate of spread. And I think there's some answers to why that's lower than what you'd see in the field. Looking at our historic drought code, another reason for why I think this fire maintained overnight more significantly than predicted is we were in critical drought. This is the 90th, 70th to 100th percentile recorded DC for the Silver station since 1985 to 2022, and then our numbers for the 2023 season. They drop off here because at this point the Silver weather station had an unfortunate exposure to sprinklers, and the entire weather station was drowned out and actually still no longer exists for BC. So fun times there. I think you can match that with our station to the northeast, even more exacerbated that the historic drought here in the June. We're way above the 100th percentile. It was incredibly dry. So I think with our high maintained FFMCs overnight and just the high level of drought there, the fire was able to dig in. It had plenty of dry fuels. It was column driven that evening, which I forgot to mention earlier. And it just maintained momentum through the night. So I didn't factor in overnight growth or that rate of expansion. And I think that accounts largely for why we had such differences between the Prometheus runs, even given running the actual weather station records versus what actually happened. Here we're looking at Fort Nelson Upper Air, not huge on the evening of the 6th. We do see above 1,000 meters. Fair, decent wind speed. So perhaps it grabbed a bit of the column and pulled it along there in the evening. But again, nothing super alarming. Looking at, again, a race through this, I thought I had much more material to present, but maybe I missed a few things. My weather analysis, I'm still learning. I reached out to a few forecasters at the time, and all the mistakes in this presentation are my own. There's no way possible that I would throw that on our forecasting staff in BC. They're quite talented, and they certainly dread me coming. My upper air had upper errors and problems in running. Representative weather stations are fairly far from the study area, even though it's flat and there's not a lot of slope influences to wind. We are talking like 25 to 50 kilometers of difference there. And over this patchy winds, patchy weather patterns in the area, precipitation was super varied. So again, localized drying may not be accurately represented by these stations. And it's the north, and the stations are difficult and hard to get to. And there's certainly some issues with our sensors. This is a photo of the Pink Mountain weather vane, which you can see is bent at a 30-degree angle. And this was immediately accessible off the highway. So we have some issues out there. And lastly, I kind of ran out of time for research on this thing. So hopefully I hit some points, and there we go.
Oh, thanks, Evan.
Yeah,
Any questions?
and
Oh,
this just while you're asking questions here, this is the current, as of March, perimeter for the Donnie Creek incident. This is sort of a fire chronology for size, and this is a chronology of how it encompassed other incidents in the area. Unlike the previous record holder, the Plateau fire, Donnie Creek consumed most of these fires before they gained any sufficient size. So it's interesting because it's basically self-propelled. It ran under its own power for the bulk of its growth. So anyway, any questions?
No questions, guys?
Yeah, go ahead, Kelsey.
Sure. This might have been something you touched on, and maybe something that I'm completely ignorant to. The location of this fire in northern BC, is it north enough that you would see that impact of the long sun? Because this is sort of close to solstice. Is there like, what I'm getting at is the standard diurnal curve. Is it standard, or is it completely out to lunch? I saw your curves. Is it part of it just because you're so far north?
I think that definitely had an influence. I mean, we're right up against the 60th, so we're starting to get into where we would see the most day length impacts in BC. So certainly that's an effect as well. And we had way longer burn lengths than I was prepared to forecast for. I should preface that this is the first fire that I was an F-band unassisted. This was my first one.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, it was incredibly confidence shattering. I was really good for the first 3 or 4 days because we had that little bit of precip and the fire didn't move. And as soon as it started to move, it was just, yeah, I was on my heels the entire time.
All right.
But thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Yep, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, Evan, just wondering up on that northeast corner there where it ran beyond where you would forecast it to run in the C2 fuels. Were you able to get out there and look at that and see if there was any differences in the fuel, i.e. heavier loading or down fuel, that sort of thing?
I did. No, it was very standard. The big difference that I observed in this area is, unlike what I'd expect to see in C2 fuels in that time of year, there's normally a surface sheen of moisture that you can see, and especially in the more boggy, swampier areas, which isn't necessarily representative of C2 fuel type. However, you could walk any part of this fire, especially the eastern section here, and come out with completely dry feet, even if you didn't have rubber boots on. This is the driest I've ever seen it up there. So I think that's particularly contributed to differences in fuel condition, if not fuel typing characteristics. This like terrain definitely wasn't a huge impact here. It's super flat, unlike the western side of this fire, which is quite canyony into the Sakani River. But yes, I did fly this, and I remember being especially shocked flying over it on the morning of the 7th at 10 o'clock and seeing a full full crown fire run in the establishment of a column. So it had just kept running all night, and I was expecting some intensity class 1, rank 1 fire, and I did not see that.
Right on. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate that.
You bet.
Any other questions for Evan?
I got a question. Yeah, I mean, really nice job with your modeling and bringing in different data sources. Your final, that run that you describe, I mean, it's a classic cold front passage pattern of, south followed by a west wind, and the perimeter really, coalescing kind of in that classic pattern. But I don't remember you mentioning cold front, but I may just have missed it. I would expect that would be the kind of thing the spot forecast would catch quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I can try to bring that up, actually. I have my spot forecasts here. So we had an upper low, a slowly tracking feature, but we didn't have aggressive cold front moving. During the day, there was some scheduled, I mean, most of the spot forecast is actually for the southwest corner of the fire. So not necessarily indicative, especially given the fact that we're talking 500,000 hectares. So the winds that we saw up in the northwest weren't really reflective of this. We didn't see a cold front passage overnight. This is why it was so surprising to me. We weren't forecasting any serious weather events. In fact, looking at the winds, we don't see any serious spikes in wind speeds at the surface level. So again, I wasn't there with an anemometer specifically to get on-site winds, and our stations are quite spread out. So maybe there were a few anomalous wind events, but that's what caught me so off guard. This was the start of a series of spread event days, basically 10 in a row, that just had me reeling by the end of it. But they started off without a bang. We didn't have a cold front passage, which is why this amount of growth was so surprising. But we saw no less than 10 kilometers of growth a day, and likely 5 kilometers of growth a night for the next 10 days. So this thing just decided to take itself on a run and just didn't stop.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Evan, during the run, was there any evidence of thunder cells in the area? Were we getting microbursts from thunder cells?
No, not that I observed. We were pretty open skies overnight. There was partially cloudy, but we didn't have any. I mean, again, I didn't stay up all night long, but talking to the forecaster, I didn't observe any thunder cells. I should have run the lightning. There were plenty of lightning in days adjacent to this, but that's something I should check again for further analysis, because you may, given this distance, maybe it was microbursts affected.
Okay. Any other questions for Evan? Well, thanks, Evan. And last but not least, Miss Shelley.
All right. I'm sorry, I gotta keep my camera off. I'm having internet issues today, so I'm hoping I can pull this off without having a camera on. Now, just give me a second, because the one thing I did not do is practice presenting in Teams. All right, how are we doing? Do you guys see my screen?
Yep, everything
Looks
looks
great.
great.
Right then, perfect. All right, so for my final project, I wanted to use Prometheus because I've never used the program before we started this training. And I chose a fire that I was on last summer, the Rossmore fire, K2 2024, which was south of Kamloops. And I also wanted to look at the beginning of the fire. I was on the fire later in the time of the period of the fire, closer to the beginning of August. And so that I wanted to have minimum fire suppression on it. So I chose to go from July 20th at noon to July 22nd to 2300. The assumptions I made when I was gathering my information for the project was that all the data I collected was correct. Field types, the weather, the topography, and that, like I mentioned, minimum fire suppression during the period I chose to run. And the map that I was provided, given on July 22nd, was correct. Now, the data I did collect was that I sent an email off to the BC Wildfire Geomatic group, asked for my field type clip of the fire location. And as Evan spoke to, BC doesn't use the national field types. We have our own. So that was what I used. The weather data that I collected was from the two closest weather stations, Glimpse and Pasca. They both were like, Pasca was 20 kilometers away, Glimpse was 21 kilometers away, give or take. Pasca was 1,440 meter elevation, where Glimpse was 1,381 meters elevation. And the fire was at 1,206 meters. I chose to start with the Glimpse weather station, but I'll go into that later. Ignition time, stuck with the ignition time of the lightning strike and its location. And the lightning strike on July 20th was at 1849. So other data that I did review, the fire was discovered the next day at 1348, when the first phone report came in, so a little before that. I did take a look at Dana's fancy upper air cheat sheet, and the C. Haynes index for July 20th and 21st at 5 a.m. was above 8, and for July 22nd was at a 7. So indicating that we were going to see some aggressive fire behavior. As you can also see on my on the photo that the air tanker officer took on July 21st at 1651, that the fire is doing a little bit of activity, so it's kind of indicating what's going on. I also pulled the 90th percentile for the last 10 years for Pasca Lake and Glimpse. And as you can see, I also have July 20th indices for those weather stations. They were close to 90 percentile, a little bit above and a little bit below, but close. So my actual comparison, I had wanted to try and get the shape as close as I could to what the map I was provided. And I mentioned, I started with Glimpse. It was a little lower in elevation. That was the reason. But I also didn't know how this perimeter was collected, if it was collected by hotspots from satellites or if it was somebody in a helicopter flying around. And I also didn't know how much how much suppression was going on. I mentioned that already. But when I ran the Glimpse weather station, it came out to be 12,000 hectares. The full fire, after all said and done, was just over 11,000. So I knew I was wrong. Something was wrong. So I decided to do some investigation into my weather stations and take a good look at the data, and notice that Pasca had 2 wind events and Glimpse only had 1 wind event, but it was Pasca wind events were higher speed. So I decided to rerun and try with the Pasca Lake. Just 1 second, make that come in. A little closer, the length of it was definitely closer, but still off on the shies. And while I was doing these simulation runs, I also ran multiple other runs. I ran perimeters, or I apologize, simulations with both weather stations combined, using each weather station as a primary just to play around. I also used, I actually tried out the Van Wagner, chose not to stick with that for the weather because of the fact that we were not close to the 60th parallel or received any rain. And it just made it quite fat of a fire. I also threw in some weather patches, starting with 5 kilometers an hour, adding 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers. But the fire just kept going further and further into that yellow color, and which is our grass type. And which again, I was trying to match the fire perimeter that was provided on July 22nd. And it just wasn't achieving it for me. So if I was on this fire at the beginning and I was the fire behavior specialist, which I was later on in the summer, but if I was at the beginning and I did my first run and I looked at this and going, what's going on? My ops chief, my ICs going, what did you do wrong? I would be going back to looking at on-site verifications, taking a look at those field types, because I didn't tweak those. Did I need to tweak those? The weather on site. Do I need to put a quick deploy weather station on to get better accurate weather data? For this weather station fire, I did put the quick deploy on the weather station at the end of my term there because we had such problems with the winds there. And then looking at topography to see if that was influencing it. For this fire, it wasn't. It's on the plateau. Ian showed a beautiful map. My fire was just north of that beautiful plateau, just south of Kamloops. And then I would rerun the simulation with the new data, trying to match what I had from the beginning. And hopefully I get it correct, but I'm pretty sure it'd be a multiple tries to correct what I was doing. And then once I got fairly close to that, I would go ahead with my predictions of what I want for the next 2 to 3 days. And if it wasn't working, I would rinse and repeat to do this again. Because these are the things that as FBANs, we need to try to help out our ops chiefs. But in conclusion, I learned that modeling is only as good as the information that you put into it, ensuring the accuracy of the simulation before you start predicting anything. And I still have lots to learn, but looking forward to practicing on active fires in the moment. Maybe not the time crunch part of it, but looking forward to actually seeing what I'm doing, if it's working or not. Any questions?
Any questions?
Everybody wants to go home?
They're going to only go home and drink beer and be silly, so they may as well stay here and ask questions. Kelsey.
Shelley, that was great. Glad to see you testing out that new tool. My question would be, did you toggle any of the burn conditions in Prometheus when you were playing with it? Did you get that overnight recovery? Did you try to constrain overnight growth at all, or how did you play that?
And to be honest, I thought about it once, but didn't. But I did look at the weather when I was analyzing it, and I actually didn't get good recovery on either of the nights. Like I would call fair and then poor for the one night. Like I think for Pasca, it was still below 80%, and then on the first night and then on the second night, it was below 60% for recovery. So I didn't feel that it would stop burning. But it was something I wish I would have done. So I probably will be doing it before the end of the day, just because I just what everybody else talked about today. I go, oh, I didn't just try that. Like I definitely tried the weather patches and the combination, but not the burning conditions.
Cool. Good one. Thanks, Shelley.
Thanks, Kelsey. Greg.
Thanks, Shelley. I appreciated seeing that. I remember driving by that fire on the Trans-Canada. So I've always found it interesting to hear about people that were on it, analyzing it when I could see it, from the highway. My question is, if I got it right, you said the actual fire is around 12,000 hectares in that fire growth event. And prediction was around 11,000. And so, like, what was your thought about how far off that is and whether it was reasonable for the purposes that you would have, let's say, be doing that sort of a prediction in those circumstances?
So the whole fire perimeter at the end was just shy of 12,000. So no, so my prediction, the glimpse prediction was 11,000. And it boggled my mind. Like I was struggling with it. It didn't have the wind events. So it was the indices were a little bit higher. So they're a little bit drier in there and driving it more. And I thought that was strange. I actually, the map they provided me, I had to do a clip to get the hectares out of it because I thought the hectares was 11,000 for the first day. And I'm just going, this is not matching. And then I finally, because the maps weren't matching. What I kind of thought was going on, but I don't know why the glimpse one was so far off when it was the closer elevation. The winds really, it was more the wind driven fire just with that cylinder cigar shape. I guess I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, Greg, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did. That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks, Shelley.
Thanks. Dan?
Hey, Shelley, thanks very much for your presentation as well. I was just interested, I mean, you talked about the difference between doing this in a course and kind of getting to learn a model setting versus an operational setting. And that's a really important distinction and a good one to catch on. So of course you have the benefit of these two weather stations, right? You can just go back and download the data and put them in Prometheus. And operationally, you can't do that. So you have your, folks like Matt here, who's got his trusty crew of forecasters generating spot forecasts. And if you're lucky, you'll get a wind forecast. Maybe 3 of them for a day, or maybe every couple hours if you really push. But so did you have a sense of the difference between kind of downloading stuff straight from a weather station after the fact versus taking a forecast and really having to kind of interpret, hour by hour, how you put in forecast values? And did you, how, because it's always easier after the fact, even though like you showed, it's not that easy. So I guess I just wondered if you had a sense of how you would operate in an operational context.
Well, interesting enough, I had so many issues with file formats and uploading data into Prometheus. I manually typed in all my weather at one point, and and with being a fire behavior forecast, I had already known a little bit more about spot weather, like most of us, but I'll be taking some of the stuff Matthew taught us about trying to look for winds. So like I already go to spot weather when I'm looking for those, what the weather's going to do in the forecasting going forward, I guess. So to me, it's just taking that and manually putting it into Prometheus. So yes.
Yeah, right on. Thanks very much.
But I would agree, downloading CSV files from our weather stations is definitely easier.
Yeah, I mean, when I took a Farsight workshop like quite a few years ago, like 20 years ago, when I was at a US conference, and I remember Mark Finney, who was the creator of Farsight, which is the US analog. Prometheus was matched, was kind of built with Farsight in mind. And I remember him really clearly talking about dummy problems with modeling where that's DUMI, you know, like whenever you're modeling, you're probably, you know, you got to be aware of DUMI errors, data errors, user errors, which you screwing something up, which you want to avoid, model errors, which you can't affect, but they're in there. And I is interpretation errors. And so there's like 4 very different sources of errors. And sometimes the whole thing works out because the errors sort of correct each other. And sometimes it really doesn't. And that's what obviously we want to avoid. But it's really hard to correct all those. It just like I liked what you did, you going back, trying to see if there's stuff you did wrong. And if you're tweaking stuff, if it was logical, but I think you kind of nailed the challenge of doing that, especially in the mountains in BC where terrain and fuels, you know, everything's hard. So yeah, just wanted to comment on that, but thanks.
Thanks, yeah.
Any other questions for Shelley? 3, 2, 1, boom. Well, thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Well, that is the end of the presentations. Everybody else will be submitting a report, except for Lori. She's doing both. But just want to thank everybody for